Welcome back to Delaware County Political News. This is part 3 of my interview with Manly Parks, in which he discusses his role as an election protection attorney for the Delaware County Democratic Party. I want to move on to another topic. Part of the duties of a solicitor election day functions, number one, and number two, I notice in your background you do something called election protection. Can you give some accounts of what you've done on election day?
A two-part question, but I will answer both parts, unlike people who get asked a two-part question in the presidential press briefings.
In other words, objection, compound question.
Not exactly, but in any event, sure.
Well, let's start with, I'll tell you what, let's break it down if it helps, and let's start with your duties as solicitor on election day. What do you do as solicitor only?
So, in the lead up to election day, I put together a team of lawyers, which we call the election protection team, and we do that for every election, every primary, every special election, every general election. We put together a team of lawyers who will go out into the field in Delaware County and go to look at polling places and monitor what's happening and try to help people who are having issues at polling places, to help provide guidance when guidance is necessary, and to be eyes and ears to make sure that the election laws and the rights of folks are being protected on election day. So I put that team together each year for each election. Then on election day, I show up at the boiler room, which is sort of the centralized, CENTCOM, if you want to call it that, for the election protection effort each election day. And I usually have some volunteer lawyers who are experienced at helping me in the boiler room, and we are there to field the calls from the greeters, from the election board workers who aren't sure exactly what's happening on some issue or another, and they want some guidance if they're not sure maybe what the judge of elections is doing. And then obviously from the election protection team members who are going around throughout the county who are encountering problems or looking for guidance, and we're a resource for those folks as well. And we then will monitor the phone lines and essentially field those types of inquiries all day. And then after the polls close, we continue to get inquiries because issues can come up during the counts about issues about what happens if a machine won't print out a tape at the end of the day, or what happens if the numbers on the machines don't add up to the number of signatures in the book, or those types of issues that, or what happens when somebody is counting an absentee ballot and maybe a protest to the absentee ballot is lodged by someone who is watching the count. So those sorts of issues come up and we deal with that. It's a long day. I usually get to the boiler room around 6:15 in the morning, and I typically don't leave the boiler room until about 9 at night. And now hopefully I do make time to duck out and grab a lunch and go vote myself. But other than that one brief absence, I'm there the whole day. Our volunteers who help me in the boiler room, because there are often more phone calls than one person can handle at certain times, they will help with that. The other thing we do on election day is when issues come up that need formal legal action, I will go over, in many instances, occasionally it's one of our other volunteers in the boiler room, but I will usually be the person who goes over and appears in election court on behalf of the county party to typically raise concerns about something that's happening on election day in the field and try to get a court to correct the problem or stop certain behavior that's inappropriate or whatever it might be.
Well, this might be tied into some of your reports, but my next question is, why is it important that you have something called election protection?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. I think on the one level, there is a nonpartisan reason, and that is that you take people who who are smart, capable lawyers who go in the field and make it their business to learn and interpret in a fair way what the election code requires in Pennsylvania. And they're there as a resource to everyone, judges of election, voters, everyone, to help them understand what Pennsylvania law is about a particular issue on election day. So that's one function. But another function, and a very important one, unfortunately, there are a number of ways in which partisan political activities by Republicans in Delaware County can impact the exercise of the fair right to vote in the county, and potentially infringe voters' rights. And the election protection team is there to identify those problems and try to address them, and then bring them to our attention so that we can go to court and get them fixed if necessary.
Now, wouldn't it be fair to say that you'd also need Republican election protection in Philadelphia, Chicago, LA, or anywhere that you have a dominant party?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you
so
put
let's not bully the Republicans here.
No, we're talking about Delaware County. That's
Sure.
why we do it that way in Delaware County. And in fact, there are groups here in Philadelphia, whether it's the Committee of 70 or the Republican Party, that put people on the ground to make sure, from their perspective, that the exercise of the election process is done appropriately. And I think that's absolutely essential to a functioning democracy. If you have one party control of the election system
Sure.
and the government,
That's right.
and there's no oversight at all, well, mischief can happen,
Right.
and does happen.
But
We
this
know
is-
from human experience.
Exactly. This is the point what we're making. This is always necessary for any democracy, and where you have a one-party dominant system to have election oversight. We're not saying that this is necessary for the Republicans in Delaware County. This is necessary
It's not
for...
unique to them.
It's not unique to them. Okay.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. So then, now that having been said, do you have any reports of instances where election protection was needed?
Well, I'll start with this statement. We didn't put lawyers on the ground on election day for fun. We didn't do it because we don't have anything better to do with our time. And it takes, for a presidential election cycle, the number of volunteers we have and the logistics involved, it takes upwards of a month of pretty active work. Something on the order of 100 to 200 hours of time to put together the volunteer teams, to train them, for those who aren't familiar with the election laws, to prepare the training materials so you can train them, to then give them suitable field assignments, and then carry out this process. This is a major undertaking. Particularly in a presidential cycle where you have a lot more volunteers. Frankly, I wish it were that extensive in every election, because, look, a local election is every bit as important, and frankly, there's probably more incentive to engage in partisan behavior at the polling place in a local election where it's going to control who ends up in the courthouse and media or whatever, than there might be in a national election where, it's a tiny grain of sand in an overall beach of votes, right? But at the local level, a few hundred or a few dozen votes could change the outcome of an election. And I think I'd like to see more people show up for a local election protection effort than for the national, truthfully. But in any event, that's a major undertaking. And the reason we do it is because there were problems that we had to go monitor and try to correct. And they're pretty shocking sometimes.
Some examples, please.
Sure. So just this last presidential election cycle, in a township in the center of Delaware County that is pretty significantly controlled by the Republicans, although Democrats are starting to make some inroads, I got a call from one of our election protection team members reporting that a constable, now that's the person, uniformed police aren't allowed at the polling place on election day because the legislature, when they passed the election code, wisely decided that was potentially threatening to voters and a tactic that should not be permitted as a political tactic. So, but you have to have some authority capable of keeping the
order,
peace,
sure.
keeping order
Certainly.
in the event that that's necessary, or helping to enforce a determination by a judge of elections. And sometimes these things can get heated, and you need something along those lines. That's the job of the constable. They're essentially the election day police. And this constable at this polling place was handing out campaign literature for Trump and the Republican candidates on the ballot. And that's outrageous to me. I mean, that is blatantly inappropriate under the Pennsylvania election code. And this person is a
What part?
neutral. Well,
Why is that outrageous?
it's outrageous because, we'll put it this way, electioneering is not permitted by the election board. When you walk into the polling place, you're not allowed, when you walk up to the book, to sign the book. The judge of elections can't say, oh, by the way, I'm a Republican and you really support the Republican ticket, or for that matter, I'm a Democrat and you should really support the Democratic ticket. The election judge can't say that. The majority inspector can't say that. The minority inspector can't say that. The machine operator can't say that. The clerk can't say that. No one who's on the election board in your polling place can advocate for a candidate. And it's equally inappropriate because they're supposed to be neutral, right? They have to have the appearance of neutrality, just like when you go into court. You can't have a judge. You can't walk into court and have the judge say, you know what, I really like the prosecution in pretty much every criminal case, but let me hear what you have to say. I mean, that's outrageous, and it's the same thing to have an election judge of elections or any part of the election board, including a constable, be engaged in partisan activity. It's unfair, it's a violation of the election code, and frankly, you should know better. And this was incredible. That was actually the first time I've ever heard of that happening, but it's not the first outrageous thing I've ever heard happen.
And Manley, what part of the election code prohibits that behavior?
Well, there are provisions of the election code that specifically address what conduct is appropriate and inappropriate by the Board of Election. And, so there I don't have the statutory number memorized because the election code is thousands of sections long, but there is a provision on it that makes it quite clear that that kind of behavior is inappropriate.
Any other reports from people in the field?
Sure. We get hundreds of reports every election day, but to talk about some of the more surprising things, we've had reports from time to time, including in the most recent presidential election, of poll workers, people who are part of the local election board, a judge of elections or a machine operator, encouraging a voter who's in there to vote for a particular candidate. Obviously, we get reports when people are encouraging them to vote for Republicans. We have had situations where somebody was offering free lunches to anyone who would vote for his candidate, also a Republican. And
Why is that illegal?
Well, you can't offer things of value in exchange for votes. I mean, that's bribery. That's been illegal since, in the old days of the 1800s, people would offer alcohol in exchange for votes. And if you know the story of Edgar Allan Poe, you may know that he died of acute alcohol poisoning in the gutter in Baltimore on an election day, when in those days people would give people alcohol and then they would go and vote in multiple polling places, and each time they voted they got another drink. So that's something that was going on a long time ago, and to deal with the obvious improprieties of that's been outlawed for a long time.
You told me there was a report in Lower Chichester. What happened there?
So the Lower Chichester situation was pretty interesting. It wasn't an election day issue per se, but what happened was the township supervisors, I believe it was, of Lower Chichester sent out a letter to all of the voters in Lower Chichester calling or encouraging them to vote for Donald Trump and attacking Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. It was a remarkable communication because it wasn't properly endorsed. It didn't indicate who it was paid for, which it should have. It should have made clear that if it was all the supervisors of the township, yet it didn't say that this wasn't an official position of the township, even though in fact it made it seem like it was. It also contained fundamental falsehoods. For example, it said that the only race on the ballot this year, it said there are no local elections on the ballot this year, which was false because there was a state rep race, there was a state senate race. Those were local races. So there were all sorts of inappropriate things about that communication, and in my capacity as county counsel for Hillary for America, which was the name of the Clinton campaign for Pennsylvania, I handled that matter and pursued it, and as best could be done in the few days before the election under the circumstances. So that was not really an election day issue, but we have many, many election day issues. We have
What happened in Swarthmore?
That was a situation where, as I understand it, a judge of elections, I'm not sure if it was in Swarthmore or not, but I think you're asking about the situation. There was a Democratic judge of elections, an elderly woman. She had opened the polling place, been at the polling place for a while, stepped away because, as I understand it, there was a health issue with, I think, her husband or someone in her family. She came back, she continued to fulfill her duties and closed the polling place. And then when she went to collect her payment for serving as judge of elections, because people on the election board get paid a very modest amount of money to do that, a criminal investigation was opened by the DA's office into whether she was, I guess, fraudulently trying to collect payment for time she didn't work because she didn't work at the polling place the whole day. Now, my concern about that is that over the years we've had many, many reports of people, judges of election or other members of election boards, having to step away for various personal reasons during the election day. Now, so long as that's not disrupting the flow of voting and it's not causing undue delays or whatever, I've never made an issue out of it because I understand that things come up and people are human beings and they have lives, and you know, to keep them there like they're sort of in jail in the election room, to keep them there like they're sort of in jail as on the election board for the day is probably going to make fewer people interested in serving on the election board. So I've never really made a big deal out of it, and I think that it was pretty clearly a partisan initiative to try to send a message or to cause trouble for somebody who was a Democratic affiliated judge of elections. And it just was unreasonable. The person had to retain legal counsel. Ultimately, the matter didn't go anywhere. As I understand it, there were no criminal proceedings, but the fact that there was an investigation in the very first instance is significantly chilling on a matter of that insignificance and
Could you repeat what you said?
on a matter of that small a magnitude and a matter that is obviously, you know, a particular personal circumstance that couldn't be helped. I mean, we can be normal human beings to one another in this world of politics, and not have to put people under the inquisition by some detective or the county detective over whether they're committed a crime under a circumstance like that. It's just, to me, unreasonable behavior.
Manley, I get the feeling that we could go all afternoon, but that's all we have the time for today. And I want to thank you for appearing on my show.
Well, you know, it's my pleasure, and I really like that people would be getting a different perspective into what happens in the political process, in the Democratic Party, and on Election Day. I think that's important for people to understand.
I do too, and I hope that we can have you on again some other time.
I'd be delighted to be back sometime.
Thanks for joining in to Delaware County Political News. Meet the Expert. We were here today with Manley Parks, and I am your host, Larry DeMarco. Please tune in next time.